Okay, so like imagine you're 8 years old again, back in a classroom, but instead of it being like quiet for learning and stuff, it's like crazy loud. Like you're right there at a rock concert.
Right.
Super overwhelming, right? And then on top of that, imagine you're trying to deal with all that while you're also navigating autism or maybe alexithymia.
Yeah.
We're going deep on that today. How
Mm.
some classroom environments, I mean, even with the best intentions, might actually be working against these students.
Definitely a topic worth diving into.
We are diving into Alexithymia and Autistic Student Behaviors by Janie Horrocks.
Okay.
And you know how we often talk about what's seen as atypical as like a deficit,
Mm.
this deep dive? If it flips to that whole script, it's about understanding the autistic system as designed. Like how can classrooms work with that design, not against it?
Yeah, it's a really different way of looking at it. And I think a lot of times we get caught up in what's perceived as missing, and this deep dive really encourages a more strengths-based approach.
Totally. And that leads us right into alexithymia. This one was a real eye-opener for me. You hear people say, oh, they're just bad with feelings. But honestly, it's so much more complex than that.
Right, it really is alexithymia. It's not just being bad with feelings. It's like, imagine struggling to even know what you're feeling inside, let alone trying to express it or understand what other people are feeling,
Wow.
especially in a busy classroom that can be incredibly isolating.
It makes you think about all those times a student might be seen as being like indifferent or checked out.
Yeah.
But what if it's really just that they experience things so differently?
Exactly. And this actually connects to another point. The source tackles head on this misconception that autistic people lack empathy.
Really? I actually thought that was pretty common.
Oh,
I thought it was considered a common trait.
it's a very common assumption for sure. But the source really challenges that notion, suggesting that a lot of autistic individuals actually experience what's called hyperempathy.
Hyperempathy. Okay, now this is interesting. So what is that exactly?
Okay, so picture this. You're feeling everyone else's emotions just as strongly as you feel your own.
Whoa.
It's almost like you can't separate your own emotions from those around you, especially in a classroom where there's already a lot going on. It can be completely overwhelming.
That makes a ton of sense. It's like turning the empathy dial way up to 11. And this actually reminds me of this one part where the source even calls out like big names in the field, like Simon Baron-Cohen, his whole zero positive view of autism.
It's definitely a bold move, and it speaks volumes about the author's push for a real change in how we think about autism, moving away from just focusing on deficits and embracing the strengths and abilities that are often overlooked.
Absolutely. So if we're looking at it through this strengths-based lens, how do typical classroom management styles measure up?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? So the source looks at 4 common styles: authoritative, authoritarian, permissive, and indulgent. And while research often points to authoritative, clear expectations, warm support, all that is the most effective overall, the source suggests that even that style could use some adjustments for true inclusivity.
Okay, so what would that look like? What kind of adjustments are we talking about?
So picture a typical classroom, right? Bright fluorescent lights, desks in rows, that constant buzz and hum of activity, maybe even one of those loud ticking clocks.
Oh, yeah.
For some students, especially those with autism or alexithymia, this can be a recipe for sensory overload.
It's like trying to learn inside a carnival funhouse.
Exactly. So the source really argues that to truly create an inclusive space, we need to move beyond simply putting different learners together. We need to move from this broad idea of inclusion to what the author calls classroom ecology.
Classroom ecology. Okay, now we're talking. Tell me more about that.
It's about intentionally designing the entire classroom environment. The physical space, how it feels, even the teaching methods themselves to make sure they support everyone.
So it's not just about who's in the classroom, but about the classroom itself. And I love how the source breaks this down into those 3 pillars: comfort, security, and safety, and then serenity and ease. It's like a spa day, not a classroom.
Right. But that's kind of the point, isn't it? We should be aiming to create these spaces where every student can feel comfortable enough to really learn.
Okay, so we're talking classroom ecology, designing like the whole environment for comfort, security, serenity. I mean, it sounds amazing in theory, but how do you actually translate that into like a real live classroom? What does that actually look like?
Well, it definitely takes some imagination going beyond the traditional setup. So instead of those harsh fluorescent lights, picture the soft diffused lighting.
Oh, I like it.
And ditch those rows of desks. Bring in some flexible seating options, bean bags, coffee chairs, even just rugs on the floor. Let students choose where they feel most comfortable and focused.
It's funny, right? We're so quick to make those kinds of adjustments for like our own workspaces, standing desks, ergonomic chairs, all that. Why not bring that same thinking into the classroom?
Exactly. And then think about noise dampening materials too. Carpets, wall hangings, even just strategically placed plants can make a huge difference.
Oh, yeah.
Absorbing all that excess sound, creating a much calmer, more focused atmosphere.
It sounds so much more inviting already. But we've also got like the security and safety piece. What does that look like in a classroom ecology?
It's more than just physical safety, too, although, of course, that's always a top priority. It's about cultivating a sense of emotional safety as well. Create a space where students feel comfortable taking risks, making mistakes, even just being themselves without fear of judgment.
It's like that quote, mistakes mean you're trying.
Right.
We need classrooms where kids feel safe to try, even if it means messing up sometimes.
100%. Especially for students with alexithymia who might already have a hard time understanding and expressing their emotions, feeling safe and accepted in the classroom is absolutely crucial.
Yeah, it's about creating that space where it's okay to not be okay. But okay, we also can't forget about the serenity and ease part.
Yeah.
How do you bring that into a space that's by nature, full of energy and activity?
Well, think about it this way. Serenity and ease, it's not about the absence of activity. It's about the quality of that activity.
Right.
It's about creating a sense of flow. Those moments when you're so completely engrossed in something that time just seems to disappear.
Oh, I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah.
Like being in the zone, totally absorbed in what you're doing.
Right. And it's really interesting you bring up flow because the source actually suggests that this is something that autistic individuals often excel at.
Why do you think that is?
Well, when you think about it, it makes sense. When the environment minimizes distractions and when the activities really play to someone's strengths and interests, it creates those ideal conditions for flow to just happen.
Yeah.
Remember how we were talking about how some autistic individuals might be super sensitive to sensory input?
Yeah.
When that input is managed in the right way, it can actually fuel focus and deep engagement.
Wow, that's such a good point. Like what's seen as a challenge in one context can be a total superpower in another.
Exactly. And that's where differentiated instruction comes in.
Okay, so let's talk about that. Differentiated instruction. I feel like that's one of those terms that gets thrown around a lot in education circles, but what does it really look like in action? Especially in a classroom that's designed with neurodiversity in mind.
Well, it starts with the understanding that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to learning. Just like we wouldn't expect every musician to play the same instrument the same way, we can't expect every student to learn the same way.
Right.
It's about recognizing and honoring the unique needs and strengths of each learner.
But how does a teacher even begin to do that? I mean, that sounds like a lot.
It definitely takes effort. It starts with really getting to know your students. What are their academic strengths? What are their learning styles? What motivates them? And even their sensory and emotional tolerances. Some might do great in small group discussions, while others need that quiet time to process and reflect. Some might learn best through hands-on activities, while others prefer visuals or listening. It's about figuring all that out.
So it's really about giving each student the freedom to learn in the way that works for them, not forcing them into some predetermined box.
100%.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be about creating 30 separate lesson plans every time. There are tons of really simple but effective ways to differentiate instruction, like offering a variety of reading materials at different levels, or letting students choose how they want to show what they've learned. Instead of just a written test, maybe they give a presentation or create a video or write a song, even design a website.
It's about making it real. Sparking that love of learning that comes from feeling seen and understood and empowered, like we were saying with those flow states. When learning feels more like play, everyone wins.
And we're back for the final part of our deep dive into creating those classroom environments that really, really support students with autism and alexithymia.
It's been a great conversation. It has. We've covered a lot of ground. I mean, from that whole concept of classroom ecology to the power of differentiated instruction. But you know what I want to circle back to?
Yeah.
Those flow states we were talking about.
Absolutely. Those moments where you're so in the zone that time just kind of disappears.
Exactly. Where you're challenged just enough but not overwhelmed. And you're using your skills to actually make progress on something you really care about.
Yes, that's flow. And it's really fascinating, this idea of flow. It connects directly back to everything we've been discussing.
Does it?
It really does. When we create that classroom ecology that minimizes sensory overload and distractions, and when we use differentiated instruction to tailor those activities to individual strengths and interests, it's like we're setting the stage for flow.
It's like all these pieces we've been talking about. Comfort, security, differentiated learning. It all comes together to create this like optimal learning experience.
Yes. And it's not just about feeling good either, although that's definitely a nice bonus.
Right.
When students are in a flow state, their learning, it just goes through the roof.
Yeah.
They're more engaged, they remember more, they're making those connections between different concepts.
It's like their brains are firing on all cylinders.
Yeah.
And it makes you think about those students who might be labeled as like disengaged or difficult in a more traditional classroom.
Right.
What if they just haven't been given the right environment or the right tools to tap into their own flow?
It's not about a lack of ability at all. It's about that mismatch between how they're being taught and what they actually need.
So besides everything we've already talked about, like classroom ecology and differentiated instruction, are there any other ways that educators can create more of these flow state opportunities?
One thing that comes to mind is giving students more choice and autonomy.
Oh, interesting.
When students have a say in what they're learning and how they're learning it, their engagement and motivation just naturally go up. It could be as simple as letting them choose their own research topics or as involved as co-designing projects.
So it's about ownership.
Exactly. When you feel like you have a voice, you're going to be much more invested in the outcome. And it changes the whole dynamic in the classroom. The teacher becomes more of a facilitator, a guide on the side, rather than the sage on the stage.
I like that. Guide on the side.
It really ties back into creating that classroom culture of respect and collaboration, where students feel safe to take risks, make mistakes, learn from each other. That kind of environment, it's like fertile ground for flow states.
So we're really talking about a pretty big shift, right? From a model of education that's all about standardization and fitting everyone into the same box,
Right.
to one that really embraces and celebrates individual differences and neurodiversity.
Exactly. And it might sound radical compared to the traditional way of doing things, but it's really about creating environments that are more aligned with how our brains are actually wired to learn.
One size does not fit all.
Nope. And by embracing all that beautiful diversity in our classrooms, we unlock so much more. Creativity, innovation, joy, it benefits everyone.
It's like we're not just redesigning classrooms, we're redesigning the whole learning experience.
Yeah.
So I'm left with this question. What if instead of trying to force all students into the same mold, we designed learning environments that embrace their unique neurodiversity and nurtured their capacity for flow? What kind of world could we create?
It's a beautiful question. And while there's no easy answer, I think the journey of asking these questions, of exploring, of continually trying to create more inclusive and supportive environments, that's what really matters.
It's about always learning and growing and adapting ourselves. That's what we're asking our students to do right.
Exactly.
Well, this has been an incredible conversation. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. If this has sparked your curiosity and you want to learn more, we've got some great resources in the show notes.
Please check them out.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep into the things that matter to you.